So, my sci-fi universe building video as promised. And it's a Doctor Who video. Couldn't have guessed. Not very unpredictable, I should say. Never use a double negative, kids. Anywho, what if Doctor Who was American? Let's jump right into it. On September 6th, 1963, the American television series Doctor Who debuted. While it at first received mixed reviews, it slowly became one of the most watched shows on television. Thanks to the incredible producers and writers, as well as the amazing wit and performance of Ray Walston as the Doctor, it cemented its place in pop culture. It followed the adventures of the very manic and mysterious figure of the Doctor, as he goes on adventures in space and time within his phone booth called the TARDIS, along with his various companions. Before we really get into the casting, I just wanted to say there was a video by someone, I don't know who it was, who did like this whole, what if Doctor Who was American? I'm going to be using some of those because I think some of them are really good ideas, and for others, I'm not. So this is one of the cases where I'm not, but I won't explain every time, so, Ray Walston as the first Doctor, while he wouldn't be as grumpy as William Hartnell, I still think he could pull it off. Obviously, he's better in comedy, the kookier grandpa type character, as well, even before the kookier grandpa character, he did a lot of funny, zany characters, and I think this could push him a little bit in terms of a more dramatic direction like William Hartnell, but also doing his kooky antics towards the end of his era, just like in real life. With that, time to cast the companions. First and foremost, we have Susan Foreman, played by Sharon Tate. I know, but given her filmography at the time, I think it could work. And she was, for her small time as an actress, she was a pretty good actor. Next is Barbara Wright, played by Phyllis Coates. Ian Chester, played by James Arness. Vicky, played by Marlo Thomas. Stephen Taylor, played by Bill Bixby. Considering that this show would be made instead of My Favorite Martian, it makes sense. Katarina, played by Donna Douglas. Sarah Kingdom, played by Barbara Feldon. Dodo Chaplay, played by Inger Stevens. Ben, played by Martin Milner. And Polly, played by Yvonne Craig. That is the first Doctor era. So I did also want to say before we move on that I will be making some name changes. If it's a major change, I'll tell you. If it's not, then I'll just go beyond it. Like, I think you can gather who Ian Chester is. So, with that, we're moving on to the second Doctor era. Towards the end of Ray Walston's third season as the character of the Doctor, he had a small health scare and wanted to leave the series because he didn't want the series to die with him if he did so. The production of the series was in chaos. They didn't know what to do with their main star leaving. Walston suggested they simply recast him, but they felt like it was too cheap. A writer of the series suggested that they recast him with someone entirely different, as the Doctor slowly developed into an alien instead of a human. So they can just explain it was part of his biology. They took the idea of him being an alien and ran with it, inventing the idea of renewal. And with that, decided to go for someone younger and ties to comedy. They eventually settled on Jack Lemmon, who wanted to go back into TV. In order to compete with NBC's upcoming show Star Trek, they ultimately decided to make the series in color, as well as have a focus on alien planets and heavy sci-fi. It is much of a difference, but all the fan casting I've seen in terms of the second Doctor, in terms of like American fan casting, obviously, I think they go with someone who's too comedic. Someone who doesn't necessarily have the depth of the second Doctor. Like Jerry Lewis is a major one. Obviously, I can't see it. He's just too funny. I'm sure he's probably done a role where he's more serious, but I have not seen it yet, so I just see him as the nutty professor. And there's not a lot of depth there in terms of what the second Doctor is, because he's kind of like the seventh Doctor, where he's kind of a goofy clown on the surface, but darker underneath and can flip a switch and just completely fuck you over. And that's what's kind of so great about him. With that, I don't know if Jack Lemmon could do that specifically, but I think he has the acting ability more so to pull that off. So I ultimately chose him, even though he more so goes for like everyman roles. I still think he's a good enough actor to do it. So with this, Ben and Polly return, played by Martin Milner and Yvonne Craig respectively. And then, big change. And this time it is Jamie McCrimmon, Highlander, turning into James Crumb, American revolutionary from the Revolutionary War. With that, Highlander very much ties to the British Isles, and I think it would be too out there for American audiences, so I went with something deeply American. How can you get more American than American Revolutionary, you know? So with that, I have James Crumb, and he will be played by Sam Elliott. Perfect. Then we have Victoria Waterman, played by Barbara Hershey, and Zoe Harriott, played by Talia Shire. Next is the third Doctor era. After another 3 seasons of Doctor Who, and with the success of The Odd Couple, Jack Lemmon ultimately decided to leave the role of the Doctor. Wanting to shake things up further, as well as quote-unquote beating out Star Trek as it was cancelled the same year, they wanted for a more grounded approach to Doctor Who, inspired by the Cold War thrillers at the time, as well as the rise of action films. They wanted a Doctor who was a bit more of an action hero, but also a scientist, to have brains and brawn. Eventually, Vincent Price was chosen as he wanted to get away from being typecast in horror fare and loved to be a role model for children. Can you imagine anyone better than Vincent Price as the American Third Doctor? No, you fucking can't. So with that, moving on. I don't need to explain myself. The main companions will be Liz Shaw, played by Holland Taylor, Jo Grant, played by Susan Sarandon, and Sarah Jane Smith, played by Margot Kidder. I remember reading somewhere that Sarah Jane Smith was based on Lois Lane. How accurate that is, I don't know, but if that is the case, it makes a lot of sense. Then we have UNIT. It's United Nations Intelligence Task Force. That's not a very British thing. And I think they also introduced American divisions in some extended universe stuff. Not totally sure, but again, United Nations. There would be an American thing, so whatever. We have Colonel Alan Stewart, played by Clint Eastwood, Sergeant John Bennett, played by Lance Henriksen, Captain Michael Yates, played by Nick Nolte. And finally, I will be casting the Master, played by Ricardo Montalban. I think it makes sense to cast the Master because he's a human villain, unlike the Daleks or the Cybermen, which would also exist to some extent in this version, obviously. But the Master is a major human villain. Yeah, you have stuff like the Monk and that kind of thing, but the Master has a lot of incarnations and that whole thing, so I ultimately decided to also cast the Master. Moving on to the fourth Doctor era. After the somewhat declining ratings of the second Doctor era, the third Doctor era jump-started the golden age of Doctor Who with some of the best stories at the time, as well as many highly favoring Price's version of the character. He tried to stay on as long as possible and was the longest serving Doctor at the time, but eventually he decided to leave the role as he felt his time was up after 5 years and wanted to go back to film full time. With this, there was yet another hunt for the Doctor. After a lot of time and tribulation, the producers believed they found the perfect Doctor, Gene Wilder. The producer wanted someone who could play both very, very dark and very, very light, as well as a touch of arrogance and being very sarcastic. And none of this was more apparent than in Gene Wilder's performance of Willy Wonka. Even though Wilder was somewhat against doing a television series at the height of his career, he eventually decided to do it when he saw the direction the series was taking, being more in touch with horror and aiming the show towards an older audience. Again, perfect casting. Gene Wilder as an American Fourth Doctor. Cannot see anybody else, so once again, moving on. So with this, Sarah Jane Smith, played by Margot Kidder, returns. Then we have Harry Sullivan, played by Michael Douglas. Leela, played by Annette O'Toole. K9, voiced by Frank Welker. Romana 1, played by Sigourney Weaver. Romana 2, played by PJ Soles. Alex, the American version of Adric, played by Michael J. Fox. Nyssa, played by Jodie Foster. Tiffany Johnston, the American version of Tegan Javanka, played by Annie Potts. And then finally, the Decaying Master, played by William Finley. Considering the fact that Phantom of the Paradise is one of my favorite movies, kind of just had to. Now we move on to the Fifth Doctor era. Despite initially being skeptical, Gene Wilder ultimately fell in love with playing the character and played the Doctor for 7 whole seasons. But once the production entered the 80s, Wilder didn't really like the direction it was going, especially with the new hotshot producer that he worked for a season. So he ultimately decided his 7th season would be his last. So a new Doctor needed to be found. The new producer wanted to find someone who was more down-to-earth and personable, while also showcasing the manic portrayal of the Doctor when needed, and his choice was Robin Williams. It was very perfect timing, as Williams was just finishing his run on another show as an alien, Mork and Mindy. When they approached him for the role, he immediately agreed, being a big fan of the show in his youth. He was a bit skeptical going from one TV show to another, so he approached Jack Lemmon for advice, and Lemmon told him to do the show only for 3 seasons to avoid typecasting, which is what Williams ultimately decided to do because of this. Again, perfect fucking casting in terms of the American Fifth Doctor. Although, to be fair, I have also seen Robin Williams for the 8th Doctor, since the 5th Doctor and 8th Doctor are pretty similar in a lot of ways, although I prefer the 8th Doctor, but that's just my opinion. It makes sense. So with that, it's just too perfect. So I went with it. So Michael J. Fox, Jodie Foster, and Annie Potts would all be returning in their respected roles. Then we have Violet Turlough, played by Ron Howard, Chameleon, played by Anthony Daniels, and Perry Brown, played by Barbara Crampton. And even though he appeared in both The Keeper of Traken and Logopolis, Anthony Ainley's Master isn't really associated as much with the 4th Doctor. So with that, I decided to cast him here. And the Tremas Master will be played by Frank Langella. Maybe a bit too famous, but he's such a fucking great actor and is great at playing villains, so screw it. Next up is the 6th Doctor era. After his 3 years were done, Robin Williams ultimately left the role of the Doctor. The ratings and audience reception was good, really good, so the producer wanted to do something very risky. Start the next incarnation of the Doctor as unlikable and make him more likable as time went on, and make him a dark figure. With this, Christopher Walken was cast, who ultimately loved the show and was happy to be a part of it. Walken wasn't a huge fan of the direction they were going in, but loved the character so much, he agreed to do it anyway. While it is, especially for newer generations, to imagine Christopher Walken in a dark, quote-unquote, dramatic role, since he's more known for comedy nowadays. The man is a really great actor, and he does do drama really well. I know I've probably said this in the past since I reviewed it, but The Dead Zone is a great example. So with this, I think he would be really good as the doctor that JNT imagined, if you know what I mean. But with that, it's an Americanized version, so I feel like he would be able to go darker, even though I know American TV is probably more sanitized than British TV, but I feel as though in terms of the tone, it would be a little bit less disguised like it is in season 22 and 23, especially to season 23. But I still think that in terms of an Americanized version / what John Nathan Turner was going for, I think Christopher Walken would fit that very, very nicely. Barbara Crampton and Frank Langella would be returning in their respected roles as Perry and the Master. And then for Mel Bush, I think this is kind of perfect casting. Yeardley Smith. While she's mostly known for playing Lisa Simpson, well, voicing Lisa Simpson, I should say, she can do very, very, very annoying very well, similar to Bonnie Langford. With that, I've seen Maximum Overdrive, and with that, it's perfect. In terms of anybody else to cast, well, might as well cast some other Time Lords. The Ronnie will be played by Cassandra Peterson, more so known for her alter ego, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. She has that snarky sarcasm that would be really good for the Ronnie. And I don't know if she plays evil really well, since she has only really done one role throughout her entire career. I know she's done others, but it's pretty much just Elvira. I think it would be kind of funny and kind of cool to have her as the Ronnie. And then the Valyard, little bit of cheating, and probably too famous and too good for Doctor Who, Christopher Plummer as the Valyard. Cheating because he's Canadian, but again, I think he could do dark very well. The man was a great fucking actor, and he would do it flawlessly. Next up is the final era of classic American Doctor Who, the 7th Doctor era. After a year-long cancellation of the show, and Christopher Walken being forced to leave the role due to studio politics, the crew were left scrambling to find another doctor. One of the crew saw a commercial for the upcoming comedy movie Harry and the Hendersons, and believed John Lithgow would be a good choice for a more lighthearted, fun, and eccentric doctor. With this, they asked him to be the next Doctor, and he ultimately said yes despite various reservations. Now, with John Lithgow in the role, the reason I picked him, even though it wouldn't be a very popular fan casting choice, is because the man can do comedy really well. Look at Third Rock from the Sun. Then he can do drama really well. Just look at Trinity Killer in Dexter. Fuck. The man is great and kind of underrated. A little bit. And with that, what I was imagining for that, he has a major amount of range for what I imagine would be his Doctor. Again, not perfectly Sylvester McCoy's Doctor, but he can do the comedic and goofiness in terms of season 24, but he can also do the Machiavellian chess player with seasons 25 and 26. In terms of all the other fan casting I've seen, it's usually one or the other. You either get someone really, really goofy or someone really, really serious. Someone who doesn't have that range to do it properly. So that was my thoughts behind John Lithgow. With this, Frank Langella, Cassandra Peterson, and Yeardley Smith would be returning to their roles, respectively. And the only new cast member would be Ace, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh. Again, she has that spunkiness and was a child, well, quote-unquote child actor, so I think she would be perfect. So with that, the very short 8th Doctor reign will begin soon. Well, not soon, but in terms of this video soon, but in terms of this universe, it would be 7 years. Let's jump into it. Despite a change in actor and the last few years of Lithgow's run being quite good, the abysmal ratings convinced ABC to finally cancel the series. During the next few years, there were rumors going on that there was going to be a reboot of the series with a different premise or a feature film to garner attention back to the series. Following the Walt Disney Company's acquisition of ABC and their assets, they ultimately decided to fast-track a film which had a rough outline with an unknown writer. They hired Sam Raimi to direct and write the film, as he was a huge fan of the series as a child. Disney and Sam Raimi planned a trilogy of films, with each film featuring a famous Doctor Who villain. The first would be the Master, the second would be the Cybermen, and the third would be the Daleks, and then a continuation of the series with the new Doctor. There were many candidates for the role, including Bill Paxton and Kyle MacLachlan, but they ultimately decided on Kevin Bacon. Yeah, so this is probably the biggest departure, depending on who you ask, but to me it's the biggest departure, and there is a method to the madness. The reason I went with someone like Kevin Bacon, I feel like it would be very much a corporation's idea of trying to find its audience. What I mean by that is what I imagine Kevin Bacon's Doctor would be. He would be like the cool, hip version, because he was very big in the 90s, and like he just did Flatliners, and he was kind of a big name. Not super, super big, but big enough to garner some attention. And with that, it would pretty much be Disney being like, what's cool and hip with the kids? And like trying to do that. I know Disney understands kids more than anybody, but in terms of a niche sci-fi franchise that they just got the rights to, they might not understand. And it's a big studio with like executive. This was Disney becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So with that, I feel like this would be like an executive's idea of what Doctor Who should be and that kind of thing. That's what I was trying to imagine with Kevin Bacon as the Doctor, the 8th Doctor. Since, even though Paul McGann is beloved nowadays, he was so not loved back in the day because it was like the American Doctor and everybody hated it. So that's kind of what I was imagining with this. But in terms of the supporting cast, John Lithgow returns as the 7th Doctor, obviously. Then I have Dr. Grace Holloway, played by Sandra Bullock. Chang Lee, played by Yi Ji-zo, who was the original actor. I just went with him because I couldn't think of anybody better. And then the Master, played by Robert Englund. I know he's pretty much, to most people, the Freddy Krueger guy, but he's honestly more than that. He's a damn fine actor, and he does villains great, not just Freddy, just villains in general. So, with that, moving on to the proper reboot of the series, the 9th Doctor era. The release of the film garnered mixed box office reception and was a box office bomb. Because of this, the trilogy and reboot of the show was canceled. However, Disney eventually released the entire series on DVD around the 40th anniversary of the show, which managed to garner a lot of attention towards the series. It was with this that they finally announced the reboot of the series following The Doctor after the 8th incarnation, as not to confuse new viewers as well as remind them of the travesty of the film. The actor that was chosen was Aaron Eckhart, who would be very different from other incarnations. and would be a darker Doctor who had PTSD from a fabled and unseen time war in between the film and the new series. I know Aaron Eckhart is a little bit of a weird choice. I had a couple in mind. I think Johnny Depp and Nick Cage were the other ones, but I ultimately chose Aaron Eckhart because he's kind of underrated, and I think he would do not like, again, not trying to copy the British version and just, again, doing that Americanized version, taking aspects and just combining it with a very, very different actor and see how that would work. And with that, I think Aaron Eckhart could do that marvelously. Put his own spin, but still keep that core of what made Christopher Eccleston's version so good. With that, we have the companions. Rose Tyler, played by Alicia Cuthbert. Adam Mitchell, played by Stephen Amell. Mickey Smith, played by Anthony Mackie. Captain Jack Harkness, played by Matt Bomer. And Jackie Tyler, played by Cheryl Hines. I know, very small supporting character, but she was important enough, so might as well include her. Short, sweet, and to the point, just like the Ninth Doctor era. Let's move on to the very popular era of the 10th Doctor. After only one season, Aaron Eckhart ultimately decided to leave the role after getting a major role in the Brian De Palma film, The Black Dahlia, and thought that would broaden his career. With this, hunting high and low, Sam Rockwell was eventually chosen as the 10th Doctor to replace Eckhart, as he was a huge fan of the series when he was growing up. So yeah, again, bringing in more Americanized versions, I think Sam Rockwell could do it. Like, he's really, really funny, and he can kind of still have that broken humanness that David Tennant brought, one of the few good aspects of his version of the character. The man has an Academy Award for a reason, even though I don't believe in the Oscars anymore, since the most memorable thing to come out of them this year is a slap, but that's beside the point. With that, Sam Rockwell, I love the man. He is so fucking talented, and he would do this pretty damn well. I think Justin Hammer is probably the closest we'll get ever to his version of a Doctor, hence why I used Justin Hammer for the poster. Moving on to the companions, Alicia Cuthbert and Anthony Mackie would return to their roles. Little Marvel connection there, funny. And then I also have Sarah Jane Smith returning, obviously, played by Margot Kidder. Now, I don't know how accurate this would be, only because she had a lot of problems later in life, and I don't know the timeline of how she dealt with that and all that stuff, and this is just supposed to be fun, so I just have her in the role. In reality, it would probably be recasted, but let's just keep it fun and light as much as we can. So, Sarah Jane Smith will be played by Margot Kidder, of course. Oh, as well as Captain Jack Harkness being played by Matt Bomer. In terms of new characters, we have Martha Jones, played by Zoe Saldana, Donna Noble, played by Isla Fisher, Astrid Peth, played by Molly Ringwald, Jackson Lake, played by Bryan Cranston, Christina, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Adelaide Brooke, played by Nancy Allen, Wilfred Mott, played by Christopher Lloyd, and then probably one of the best casting decisions out of this entire fake universe, Alan Tudyk as the Master. I don't think you can get more perfect than that. Hell, he would probably be a better fucking Master than John Sim. I digress. With that, the 11th Doctor era soon begins. Despite the immense popularity of his Doctor, Sam Rockwell ultimately decided to leave the role after 4 years, thinking his time was done. ABC considered canceling the show due to his popularity, but the producer managed to convince them otherwise. With this, a new producer took his place, and with that, a new Doctor, who was more along the lines of a goofier and childlike portrayal, but still kept the madman in a box personality, while also being an old man in a young man's body. With this, Matthew Gray Gubler was eventually chosen to fill the role. I think it's safe to say that in terms of the new Who Doctors, they're more Americanized versions of their actual counterparts. Well, you could probably believe that most of the classic era doctors are American carbon copies, mainly with Gene Wilder, Robin Williams, Vincent Price, a little bit of Ray Walston, a little bit of Jack Lemmon, and that kind of thing. These are very much Americanized versions, not totally like their British counterparts, but like them enough, but doing their own thing. I know I keep saying that, but I'm just trying to explain myself. With this, Matthew Gray Gubler would certainly be a weirder portrayal than a sillier portrayal with a deep, dark personality underneath. So he would just be weirder. But I fucking love Matthew Gray Gubler. I love the weirdness of that man. But in terms of the companions, I have Amy Pond, played by Emma Stone, Rory Williams, played by Grant Gustin, River Song, played by Famke Janssen, Craig Owens, played by Tom Segura, Clara Oswald, played by Anna Kendrick, and The Warrior, played by Al Pacino. I know, you're probably thinking, what the fuck? Al Pacino playing the Doctor? That would never happen. Yeah, they said that about John Hurt, and look where we are, so that's what I pretty much thought of. I'm like, in this fictionalized universe, who the fuck would never play the Doctor? Ah, yes, Michael Corleone himself. So, there we go. 12th Doctor era soon begins. After another 3 years, Gubler ultimately decided to leave the role, feeling like his time was done. Wanting to shake things up further, as well as having it feel like classic Doctor Who, an older actor was going to be brought in to play the Doctor. Many candidates were considered, but ultimately, Matthew Modine was chosen to play the title role, and he was yet another huge fan of the classic series. This was actually probably the toughest casting in terms of the New Who Doctors. I don't remember who I had. No, I do remember. I had John Cusack initially, and maybe someone else, but I think John Cusack was the main one. But I just couldn't see it, so I'm like, all right, who's similar to him? And I think I started looking up like pictures of like similar actors. I don't know. I think I just went down this weird rabbit hole, and I saw the picture that I made the poster out of, and I'm like, that's the 12th Doctor, and it just fit. So I'm like, fuck it, I'm going with Matthew Modine. I think he could do it. I haven't seen a ton with him, but what he has done, I'm mainly basing it off of Stranger Things, where he just played this stern government character. So I'm kind of imagining that, like a very stern, stoic version. But he can, be kind of goofy and silly, mainly as Joker from Full Metal Jacket. But with that, before I talk too much, let's move on to companions. Anna Kendrick and Famke Janssen would be returning to their roles, respectively. Then we have Nardole, played by Scott Grimes. Yeah, I wanted to pick someone really different, someone who's just really known for very, very goofy characters. And I was imagining his role on the Orville, pretty much, and I like what he's doing there, so I'm like, I think he can fit with the Americanized version of Nardole. It was either him or doing a more of a carbon copy version with like Zach Galifianakis or something, and I didn't want to do that, so I ultimately went with Scott Grimes. Next is Billy Potts, played by Zazie Beetz, Missy, played by Catherine Hahn, and the Master, once again played by Alan Tudyk. Sorry, I forgot to mention him before. And then I also decided to cast the first Doctor from Twice Upon a Time. Even though he doesn't look like him at all and is a totally different actor, I picked Ray Wise for the role of the first Doctor. Because what I was kind of thinking, I'm like, okay, this guy is nothing like him. But I was thinking, I'm like, but then I thought about it a little bit more, and the version that we see in Twice Upon a Time, in terms of the first Doctor, was sort of a betrayal of the actual first Doctor because Stephen Moffat's a fucking idiot. So we got like the, sexist piece of shit as the first Doctor. So I'm like, alright, let's get the villain from Twin Peaks. Sure, that'll work in terms of if we're going another betrayal of the character in terms of this version. So that's what I was trying to think of. Like, how can this guy work? Oh yeah, let's make him totally fuck up the first Doctor like it is in our universe. With that, the final era of Doctor Who will begin soon enough. After another comfortable 3 seasons, Matthew Modine decided to leave the role of the Doctor. Now with a new producer, there was an ultimate change-up. The Doctor would become a woman. With this, many defenders and detractors, ranging from genuine criticism to blind love/hate, would make their voices heard. However, the producers would stick to their guns, and Elizabeth Moss would be cast as the Doctor. She would be more along the lines of a jovial and quirky Doctor than the last few darker Doctors. So, in terms of this Doctor, I hunted high and low. I picked Elizabeth Moss almost immediately. But I was like, can I pick someone better? I couldn't find anybody. I think Elizabeth Moss would do this version of the 13th Doctor really well. And what do I mean by that? Well, I do think Elizabeth Moss is a pretty damn good actress. The problem is, the thing about Elizabeth Moss is, I think she can be very good. She's a little crazy. And I think she can do terribly under bad direction, just like Jodie Whittaker. Jodie Whittaker's a good actress. I've seen her do good shit. Broadchurch pretty much being the only thing I've seen her in that's not Doctor Who, but she was very good in that. And Elizabeth Moss, she's been in good stuff like Mad Men and The Invisible Man. I know some people disagree with me on that, but I thought she was good there. But she can do stuff under bad direction, and I think she could work. So before I ramble too long, let's look at the companions. Well, first things first, in terms of returning people, we have Captain Jack Harkness, played by Matt Bomer, but outside of that, nobody's returning. So, we have Greg O'Brien, played by Thomas F. Wilson, Ryan Sinclair, played by Jesse Usher. Now, for Yaz's counterpart, I went with something very, very different, because from what I know, and please tell me if I'm wrong about this, I would love to learn new things, but from what I know, England has a very high Indian population, due to obvious reasons. And with that, in terms of the American version, I decided to go with a Hispanic actress. I just think that would make a lot of sense, since America, despite having that melting pot of cultures, we have a very high Hispanic population. And I think that would make the most sense. With that, Amelia M. Santos would be played by Ana de Armas. Way too fucking famous, but I don't care. Next, we have Dan, played by Bill Hader. This version of the Master, played by Rami Malek. Again, way too famous, but I don't care. And finally, we have the Ruth Doctor, the Fugitive Doctor, whatever the fuck you want to call her, played by Viola Davis. Once again, way too fucking famous, but once again, I don't care. And with that, that's kinda it. That was What If Doctor Who Was American? And it was kind of fun. I do like doing stuff like this, and even though it's not as big as the DCU project, I still have a lot of fun with it. So with that, I have another upcoming universe-spanning video that I said was Marvel-themed. You can once again guess in the comments, but that is about it. Maybe I'll do another edition when the 14th Doctor finishes their first season or whatever. Probably not. I just wanted to do something that was kind of fun, not as grueling as a DCU project, but still, like, I love building universes. That's just my thing now, apparently. So with that, stay tuned for that next video and whatever upcoming videos there are. Peace.